Monsters coming down the hall. Spires cover all the walls. Serial killer is on the line. Wants to know if you have the time. Aliens are landing soon. This will mean certain doom. A chainsaw sputters and comes alive. Blood and death are close behind. One thing you can be certain of, the zombies just can't get enough. Just one more bite is all they want. The ghosts downstairs are on the hunt. The Shade Chronicles are keeping score. That's what all the writing's for. They record their stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
Welcome to Season 3 of the Shade Chronicles, a podcast featuring short works of sci-fi and horror fiction. Here are your hosts.
Hi, this is Derek Lefford.
Hi, this is Lawrence Trokey, and thank you for spending your time with us. Let's get started with our first story.
The Shade Chronicles are keeping score. That's what all the writing's for. They record the stories one by one so you don't miss all the fun.
The Hill You Die On by Mathew J. Hampton. Tom, that bird is back. Come see. Thomas Fletcher froze with his mug raised halfway to his lips. The white one? He asked. I thought they only lived for about 10 years, Jenny mused, tilting her head. He put his still warm English breakfast back onto the tabletop and got to his feet. Dear God, no, he thought. Not today. Today of all days. At the back door, he slipped on his sandals and took up his keys. I might tinker around in the shed for a bit. Won't be too long. What do you do in there, I wonder? She said with a grin, asking but not asking. He gestured to the oak spice rack by the stove, and to avoid lying outright said, I build things. Jenny blew him a cursory kiss, more a puckering of her lips and a sucking of her teeth, and turned away to search for the bird again. Thomas did not look up for the pale omen as he crossed the yard, though he had followed it to this spot many times in the last 3 decades, but kept both eyes on the shed's door until he stepped inside. Once the door was closed and locked behind him, he flicked a switch. Fluorescent lights stammered to life. Past his workbenches and lathe was the shed's empty corner. It was still dark, its spotlight taking longer to warm up, but it blinked on as he approached. The skeleton lay sprawled on a patch of grass. It was the human skeleton of an adult male, immaculately preserved, its long bones picked clean by wildlife, and the first green edges of moss forming between the joints. The 2-meter square section of grass, which had been spared the application of concrete for the shed's foundation, was healthy and never required trimming. What is it? Thomas whispered. Where? He fetched his flashlight from the tool shelf and clicked it on, peering at the remains. It was not immediately clear how death had occurred, as there were no obvious fractures or abrasions. Worst of all, the right hand was empty. As though he refused to believe his eyes, without assistance, Thomas took his glasses from the pocket of his dressing gown and put them on. The skeleton's right hand remained empty. He grunted in frustration and straightened, sparing it a final glance as he turned to leave. This could not mean anything good. On returning to the kitchen, Thomas saw his eldest daughter grinning into her cereal. She sang a greeting, swaying her hips to every syllable, and poured milk into her bowl. It was almost enough to drive the skeleton from his mind. The top of your head is going to fall off if you smile any wider, he said. Good sign. Jenny patted her daughter's arm, but didn't take her eyes from Thomas. I remember how nervous I was. When are the girls getting here? At 10, Ella said, carrying her breakfast away down the hall to her childhood bedroom. I should shower. Any young woman that giddy was sure she was making the right choice, and he thought his soon-to-be son-in-law was a decent sort, so he didn't mind footing the bill for the festivities. Neither of his parents had made it to his wedding with Jenny. It was a fact which she knew troubled him. Father deceased and mother uninvited. So they were excited for Ella's big day. Would feigning an onset of sickness now be a good start, he thought. You've got that look on your face again, Jenny mused. Do I? I'm all right, I think. As she leaned across the countertop and gave him a kiss on the cheek, he couldn't help but notice she was inhaling through her nose as she did. Checking he hadn't been sneaking off for a smoke. He hadn't touched one in nearly 7 years, but he didn't begrudge her suspicions. He would walk down to the shed at the oddest of times. The skeleton which had persuaded him to quit the coffin nails had come shortly after Ella had finished high school. It had held the sun-bleached stub of a cigarette filter between the first and second fingers of its right hand, grinning at him as if to ask, "Hey, what are you gonna do? Just can't seem to kick them." 2 years later, his doctor had caught a tumor early and blasted it to smithereens. How many had there been, he wondered? Was the cigarette one the 10th or 11th? Was today the 15th skeleton I've seen? They were rarely so obtuse. One morning he had been led to a skeleton, as always by the White Raven, and found it clutching a fork. He decided to fast all that day. Until mid-afternoon, the growling of his stomach had persuaded him to make a coffee. They had owned an old and temperamental hot water jug, one which occasionally refused to switch itself off, even when at full boil, and he'd gotten into the habit of switching it off at the wall when the steam was piping up out of the spout. That afternoon, he had been holding a teaspoon. He saw that, if he had been holding a fork or knife, as he reached for the electricity plug, he could have jammed it right into the spare slot and gotten a heck of a shock. Sometimes, the pale right hand offered only mystery. On the day when it had handcuffs dangling from its radius bone, he had been on high alert, but never saw a police officer or escape artist, let alone a real set of handcuffs. For the millionth time, he considered telling Jenny about the skeleton. Thomas wasn't even sure she would see it. He considered phoning the police when he first came across it. He was a younger Thomas Fletcher then, still Tommy to his colleagues, out surveying the very land on which his house now stood, back when his company was still in its infancy. Leaving his 1998 Ducati Monster motorcycle at the office, he had been driven to the site by Mason Byers, his business partner, eventual best man at his wedding, and who had bought out Thomas's company shares upon retirement when it was time to hang up the hard hat. On that spring day, however, it was Mason who took the north end of the lot, while Thomas took the south. Past a copse of trees and up a short rise, momentarily distracted by a white raven taking wing overhead, Thomas found what he initially took to be a discarded anatomical model from a doctor's office, since the owner of the lot was a physician, and the patch of grass had been empty when they had done the first inspection the week before. He examined it closer and saw it was not held together by pins and magnets the way a PVC model skeleton is, but carefully arranged. Its lower half was badly smashed, the thighs and hips reduced to so much powder and shards as though its life had been ended by terrible accident. In its right hand, it held a set of keys, Thomas's set of keys. He had pulled them from his pants pocket, held them in front of his eyes, and compared them to the set, hooked around the index finger of the remains at his feet. Same fob key for the garage, same triangular motorcycle starter key with the red Ducati logo, same mini 8-ball keychain he got for Christmas from Jenny, who he was still only dating. He stared for a long time. Upon returning to the office, Thomas feigned engine trouble and got a lift home from Mason. They took a detour to avoid the congestion caused by a 3-vehicle pileup which had occurred on the road ahead. It could not be certain this crash could have killed Thomas and pulverized his body from the waist down, but the theory could also not be disproven. The skeleton was not there when he returned the next week to complete the surveying, but he saw it again 6 months later, complete with albino bird perched in a branch nearby. This time, it held another bone, still capped with white flesh and crawling with ants, a bone much smaller than many on his own body. That night, he ordered the fish. Jenny ordered the chicken and was enjoying it, so much so that Thomas had begun to regret his choice until she started to choke. He performed the Heimlich maneuver and asked her to marry him later the very same evening, and all was well. The lessons were clear. First, he must avoid what the skeleton grips in its right hand. Second, he must keep the area safe and secret. He had bought the lot from his own construction company at a steal. The workshop's cement slab had been poured on the same day as the houses, and he put up the corrugated steel walls on his own over 2 meltingly hot days. Over the next year and a half it took to build the house, he drove past every morning to look out for the white raven, spotting it once. That skeleton had a chunky silver ring cradled in the fine, knobbly bones of its palm. He had felt anxious and paranoid all day, thinking of delaying a business dinner with the owner of another construction firm and sending Mason alone to say give the okay to the no-brainer merger deal, but took his motorcycle to the restaurant all the same. When he saw the silver ring on the man's hand, he'd interrupted Mason and said, "We need to think about it a little longer. Look at the books." 2 months later, the firm in question was issued a bill of indictment, and half the management were in handcuffs for embezzlement and tax fraud. It would have taken his company down with them. Once he had the keys to the house, he'd felt a species of conditional invincibility. Nothing on earth had been more important to him than stability until he found the thing that was more important: stability for his family. But today— "Why today?" Thomas asked, looking down at the skeleton. "And what does it mean?" He held the flashlight in one hand, the other supporting his weight as he peered closely at the bare bones. It was more weight than he'd lugged around when he put up the walls around the workshop. Retirement agreed with his mind, not his waistline. He leaned further, looking into the corner to see if the object had fallen from its hand and rolled away, but saw nothing but grass. Thomas did not touch it, lest the spell break. He had never physically touched any of the skeletons, nor had he shown one to another soul, not sure they would understand its importance the way he did, but more so afraid they would see only an empty patch of grass. Jenny had seen the white raven, he knew that much, as had each of their 3 children. A horrible thought struck him. What if it was a disease, an airborne virus it held invisibly in its dusty palm? He straightened up with a groan and a cracking of joints and stepped back. "No," he grumbled, "that's stupid." The raven awked at him as he returned to the house, something between a laugh and a cry, and he glared at it. It took real effort to not shout back at it, to throw a pebble from the garden, to force it to take wing, to demand to hear what it wanted of him. He remembered a skeleton from 10 years ago, one which held his cracked mobile phone in its hand and a rusting knife jutting from its ribs. He had switched off his device and stayed inside all day, meetings cancelled, fasted but for fruit from the bowl on the dining room table, and steered clear of the kitchen and its block of knives. It had given him indigestion the next day, but he had survived. That should be it, he thought. I have to stay home. I have to, for my family. The warnings the skeletons had given him, the second chances and insights had blessed him with long life and a healthy family. A dozen or more grisly deaths and disasters had been avoided by what was either a supernatural intervention or an hallucination. Thomas barely realized he was inside until Jenny was placing the back of her hand against his forehead. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not sure," he said. The thought of missing his daughter's wedding twisted his guts into knots. But what choice did he have? These walls around them, this health and success, they owed in large part to his little secret. This was always the solution when he didn't understand the warnings. He would isolate himself for the day to avoid all possible threats. How could he avoid unforeseen hazards at a day-long party with 200 guests? What danger was there besides breaking his daughter's heart? His own parents had not attended his wedding to Jenny. Tommy Sr. had been 10 years in his grave, so they could not begrudge him for not RSVPing. But his mother had boycotted the event because they had refused to invite his uncle, who had made Thomas's childhood 100 times harder than it had to be. Many of the wedding photos were conspicuous with their absences. He wished his father had been there, but nowhere near as much as he wished his father had survived pancreatic cancer. If only Ella knew he was going to miss the wedding, so he could be around long enough to see her enjoy her marriage. He wished he could telepathically implant it in her mind. A farewell kiss before she departed for the day's preparations would have to do it. He could live with that. A peck on the cheek, an apology, and all was well. "Where's Ella?" Jenny blinked. "She's already left. It's nearly lunchtime. They're doing hair and makeup at the venue." Thomas nodded, letting his hand rub his chest as the sole outward sign that he felt a dagger of regret plunge into his heart. "I can't just stay home," he thought. "I can't not go. I can't disobey the warning. I want to see my grandchildren one day." "You can't be thinking of staying home," Jenny asked him. "Skipping the wedding?" He tried to hide the hopelessness with a smile which was half wince and yet also half grimace. "Pity me," it said. "I'm sick. Don't look too closely so I can more comfortably lie to you." The shame plunged a second dagger into him. As the seconds ticked by, he knew he should have said something. He wanted to approach this with reason. It was not only death and dismemberment which the skeletons had spared him. He remembered the silver signet ring that got him out of the bad merger. He had avoided financial ruin at worst or legal trouble at best. The other hemisphere of his brain reminded him that the wisdom of the skeleton had saved him from near-certain death a dozen times, and he owed it the benefit of the doubt, if nothing else. Jenny squeezed his hand. "Whatever you're scared of, it's okay. You can talk to me about it." Thomas nodded. He had found the only thing that really mattered. He emerged from the ensuite bathroom in his best charcoal grey suit. Jenny was resplendent in a sunset cocktail dress, its gradient from burnt orange at her collar to coral yellow at the calf, and he marveled at her beauty. She had aged like fine wine. He thought of the bottle of Chateau Neuf du Pape they'd shared on their 10th anniversary, aged as long as their marriage, and agreed that the best things mellow and mature with time. What misgivings he had, and they were legion, melted away when she saw him dressed and ready. It was a crinkly-eyed cheek-buster of a smile, which was reserved for the rare occasions when he did spectacularly. After all, he thought, how many times have I taken the plunge into uncertainty with her? Thomas Fletcher arrived with plenty of time to walk the bride to the altar and shake the groom's hand. He quickly grew impatient with the ceremony and considered slipping away back home after playing his part. But the venue for the reception was within spitting distance, and the afternoon was fragrant, with cut grass and honeysuckle, lit with paper lanterns, and a sunset, which would burn to dusk in a way that lit his wife in a million hues. Each course was delicious, each guest delirious and congratulatory, and life was the sweetest it had ever been. The skeleton crossed his mind exactly once when he cut his way around a duck thigh for the main course. The newlyweds danced, then did everyone else, and all was well. A car, one of dozens, ferried Thomas and Jenny back to their house late in the evening. They undressed each other and made love. Once in pajamas, they embraced under the blankets and fell asleep with nothing but contentment in their hearts, and all was well. At midnight, Thomas Fletcher died peacefully in his sleep after the happiest day in his family's living memory. He was survived by his wife, 3 daughters, and 1 son-in-law. A white raven stood silently on a tree branch as his casket was lowered into his grave, and all was well.
For 2 seasons, the Shade Chronicles podcast has introduced you to a universe of the scary, strange, weird, and fascinating. Now all of the stories from the first 2 seasons of the podcast are collected and available in a hardback book for your reading enjoyment. Newly edited and revised, experience the fright and wonder again of the stories from the Shade Chronicles, and join us on an exploration of imagination. Find your copy of Tales from the Shade Chronicles podcast on Amazon today, also available in paperback and Kindle versions.
Attention Shade Chronicle podcast listeners. The merchandise store is now open. You can find the merchandise store on the merchandise tab on the Shade Chronicles website, which is at theshadechronicles.com. Find premium t-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, travel mugs, ball caps, and more at the Shade Chronicles podcast merchandise store. We now resume your regular programming.
Discovery by Jake Willis. So, are they confined safely? The head of the British government's newly formed Alien Threat Department, John Milford, asked the army sergeant stationed at the open door. "Yes, sir. You can now speak to them without worry," the sergeant replied, and then moved aside to let John out of the door. Maybe without worry, but without fear? John shrugged. This was now his job, and he had to deal with it. Waiting for the lift down to the hastily built, secure area, John pondered his new job. 5 days ago, he was an assistant to an MI6 liaison officer. Then the ship was discovered. Hidden in a remote Scottish valley, it was discovered by 5 SAS men on a training mission. At first, not believing what they'd found, they contacted their officers, who at first treated it as a joke. They had soon found that it wasn't. A raid was quickly organized, and 10 SAS men supported by Marines had quickly secured the ship, and unbelievably, captured 5 aliens. John then found himself in the highly dubious position of ambassador to these new visitors. Ambassador, because no one really knew what to do with them. Were they invaders or just observers? This was the job John had been handed: find out why they were here. He didn't understand why he had been chosen at first. Then it dawned on him. He was unmarried, no immediate family, intelligent, but the main reason, of course, he was basically expendable. All the information he had so far was that the aliens had been taken completely by surprise. They spoke English. They know this because they were warning the SAS men not to touch anything in the ship, as it might self-destruct while they were being captured. Since then, they hadn't spoken a word in English, although they were talking to each other in an unknown language, until they were separated into individual cells. One more interesting piece of information was that the scientists who had been taken up to the ship felt that that ship or others like it had been there for years. The depression in the ground had markings consistent with hundreds or possibly thousands of years of use. They would update him when they had more data. Now John was on his way to interview them. He had been assured that he would be behind an impenetrable screen and could communicate through a microphone and speakers. The thing niggling away at the back of John's mind was that there were nuclear weapons trained on this base and the ship, just in case. In his pocket, he had a small transmitter. If he felt that the base or even the world was in danger, he could call down a tactical nuclear weapon upon them. No pressure. Just flip the safety off and press a button. He wouldn't even feel it. Instant vaporization. Leaving the lift, John found himself face to face with the SAS team leader who captured them. He held out his hand. The returning grip was firm with just the right amount of pressure. John smiled. "Hello, Captain Evans, I presume?" The captain let go of John's hand and smiled back. "Yes, sir. I have been instructed to give you all the help with this I can." John thought for a moment. "How did you capture them? Did they fight back?" The captain laughed. "It was easy. The team that found them had walked through some sort of light force field that was hiding the ship. The team used their intelligence, thankfully, and backed away once they realized what they'd found. When we turned up 4 hours later, the aliens were all outside the ship, eating and drinking. Our team sneaked up and grabbed them. No resistance whatsoever." John smiled again. "Captain, I am sure it was only easy because of all the planning and good execution of that plan. Don't do yourself down. This was something no one in history has ever done before. You are to be congratulated." Captain Evans had the good grace to blush. "Thank you, sir. Would you like to see them? They'll not be able to see you until we let them." With that, he pointed at a door opposite. A deep breath made John feel braver. "Let's do this," he said. His first look at the aliens made him stop. He was not expecting them to look so human, but still so wrong. The creature on the other side of the glass was about 5 feet 6 inches tall, no hair at all, long arms and short legs. Its face was human enough, but the proportions were slightly wrong. The face was triangular, narrow chin and wide forehead, not by much, but enough to make John uncomfortable. It wore a silver suit that was loosely fitted with lots of pockets. John turned to Evans. "Have those pockets been checked?" "Yes, sir," he replied. "They are empty, but we couldn't work out how to get those suits off, so we left them. We didn't want to hurt them, as we still don't know why they are here." "Okay, open the glass and turn on the mic, please." John sat in the chair provided and prepared to be the first person to interview an alien. "Can you hear me? We know you speak English." The alien turned towards him. John suddenly realized that he wouldn't be able to read any of the expressions in his face. What might mean one thing to a human might be different to these aliens. The alien stared at John, examining his face with the same look, John felt, that an animal examining his prey might have. "There I go again," thought John, making assumptions about what the expression might mean. Catching him completely by surprise, the alien spoke. "Are you in charge? Make sure that your men do not enter or touch my ship." This came out as a statement, not a question. Its voice had a flat tone, completely devoid of emotion. John recovered quickly. "Well, Captain, I am in charge as far as you are concerned, and I have issued orders that the ship shall not be touched." Something flashed across the alien face. Interesting, John thought. I'll note that expression as surprise. The alien spoke again. "Captain, you called me Captain. Why?" John smiled. "You said my ship, then gave me an order. I would guess that makes you the ranking officer aboard. The equivalent rank on our world would be Captain." Another expression passed over its face. Puzzlement? The alien turned away, paced to the far wall, turned and came back. Looking John in the eye, he spoke again. "I will not talk again until I know my crew is safe." Turning to Captain Evans, he asked, "Can we show him his men, without any physical contact?" Evans nodded. He pressed a series of switches. 4 screens came on. On the left wall of the cell, on these the alien could see his crew members. Evans leaned towards the mic. "You can also talk to them." Without hesitation, the alien snapped out several sentences in its own language. John watched the screens as this happened. He noted 3 aliens didn't react at all. The last one looked at the floor instead of his captain. "Turn the screens off, Evans. Thank you."
John made some notes on a pad by his hand, then looked up.
"Do you have a name?" "What should I call you? My name is John." "You may call me Captain. My name would mean nothing to you." The flat tone of its voice made things very hard for John. He couldn't gauge anything from the voice. He liked the attitude, though. The alien was trying to establish boundaries. That's good. It gave John a small something to work on. John made a few more notes. "Okay, are you a threat to this planet? I ask this first because my leaders want to know. I have to warn you, we can destroy this whole area, including your ship, if any hostile actions are forthcoming. We will take no chances with you." He hoped the alien couldn't detect the rising panic in his voice. Sweat was appearing on his forehead and down his back now. Another expression on the alien's face, similar to the surprise one. The alien hesitated for a minute, then spoke slowly. "There is no need to overreact. Please do not destroy us. We are not here to invade." "Then why are you here? You do realize that this is first contact for us with an alien race. In that respect, we have no guidelines and will err on the side of caution." John hoped his approach would work. They were obviously intelligent and hopefully would be reluctant to die. Again a long hesitation, then, "I cannot tell you why we are here. I will assure you that we mean no harm. In fact, exactly the opposite." This statement threw John. If they mean no harm, why couldn't they tell him the reason they were here? Let's try a different approach. "How long have your race, been here? When did you first visit our planet?" The expression that crossed the face of the alien before it answered reminded John of something, but it wouldn't come to mind. The alien was obviously thinking very carefully about its answers. "The truth is probably for the best. 20,000 years of your years." The flat, matter-of-fact monotone of that sentence cut through John's consciousness. 20,000 years, he thought rapidly. "Have you ever interfered with human development?" He snapped out the question, hoping that the alien would answer without thinking. No such luck. There was, though, the longest pause so far. Then the alien responded. "I would have to consult with my superiors before answering that question." A chill ran down John's spine. He turned to look at Captain Evans. The captain had a look of absolute horror on his face. "Are you saying you have done something in the past to drive my race in a certain direction?" He tried to keep his voice as toneless as the alien's. Now John really wished he could read the expression on the alien's face. It seemed to be trying to show several emotions at once. "I would have to consult with my superiors before answering that question," it repeated. John tried a different tack. "You told me you, as a race, meant us no harm. Then your ship is not a warcraft, is that correct?" The alien looked distinctly uncomfortable. "That is correct. We are no threat to your planet." "Then what sort of craft is it?" "If we are to believe you, we need to know what sort of craft that is." John was getting insistent. These hesitations were starting to annoy John. This one stretched on for some time. The alien was having problems deciding what to say. John stood up. "Okay, let's go talk to the others." The alien looked up. "No, wait!" But John had left. Closing the door, he turned to Captain Evans. "Let him sweat for a while. I want to talk to the alien in Cell 5, the one who wouldn't look at his." Captain Evans nodded and led John down a corridor to another identical door with no markings. The corridor had 2 guards at each end, one around the corner, one in plain sight. They watched John and Captain Evans like hawks. As they entered Cell 5, the alien in there looked up. He then started talking very quickly in his own language. They let him run down and stop. Then John produced his notebook and sat down at the screen. He looked at his notebook, then at the alien. "We have spoken to your captain. We know you aren't invaders." He then smiled and looked down at his notebook. After a few seconds, he raised his head and said, "Your captain has assured us of your good intentions, and we believe him. It all makes sense to us. We just want to ask you a few questions." His gaze apparently returned to the notebook, but were still on the alien's face. There was a look that John could possibly equate with relief. The alien started gabbling again when John held up his hand. He smiled and said, "In English, please. We don't speak your language."
The alien stopped. He looked up as if trying to access a memory. "I am sorry. I am not used to this. It is my first trip as a XXXXX. The word meant nothing to John. "It is as my captain says." John sat back and tried to look harmless. "Thank you for confirming that. Now, tell me about your role here. Your captain wasn't too clear on that." "I am just what you may call an analyst. We do not expect things to change enough yet to start trading here." John hid his surprise well and bluffed his way through. "Yes, I understand that, but do we really have to change any more to suit your purposes for trade?" John awaited the answer with barely held breath. The alien made a gesture with his hands that John didn't recognize, but looked like one of dismissal. "We have strict rules about trade," said the alien. "A race has to reach a certain level of sophistication before we are allowed, by the Federation, to trade with them. We would be removed if we broke the rules. We have thousands of years of compliance." He then did something that could be loosely described as a grin. John was stunned. A federation? That implied more alien races than work together. He held his cool. "We believe there are lots of races in your federation, and you all trade with each other?" John was nearly breathless with fear. Were they all benign? Again the dismissive gesture. "Of course. Once a race reaches a certain level, we can trade with them. Every planet has something to trade." The alien now seemed smug. John turned to Evans and whispered, "You are sure we are recording this?" Evans checked a panel and nodded. "What resources do we have that you might want?" "And what is stopping you trading with us?" John waited. The air was thick with anticipation. "Lots of things. You have some minerals that are scarce in the universe. You also have enormous quantities of workers. This is your most valuable resource. There are billions of you. We could never have imagined that you would breed so many this quickly." John swallowed. "Workers?" He drew a breath and asked again. "So, why don't you trade with us? If we have what you need." "I would have thought my captain would have told you. This ridiculous belief in invisible beings." Evans gasped, and John thought as fast as he could, then took a wild guess. "Wait," he said. "You manipulated our race to produce vast numbers of workers, but a byproduct was the belief in supernatural beings, like God?" The alien did a remarkable human-like sigh. "This has never happened before. In thousands of years and over 600 planets, we have never had this problem. We do not understand it." The fear that was in the background of John's mind started to break through. 600 worlds. They have changed to suit their trading needs. What had they changed to produce this result here? "Are you telling me no other planet or race has a god or something similar?" John really didn't want the answer, but awaited it nevertheless. "Never. That is why I am here. I study statistical anomalies. Your planet has produced one species with numerous religions. One religion maybe we could understand literally as an anomaly, but hundreds. This is simply insanity on a large scale. No other species in the universe has thought that they were created by an invisible being that watches over them." John glared at the alien. "But that is exactly what did happen. You made us to suit yourselves. You changed us to be what you wanted for future gain. If you think about it, you created our gods too. You were our gods.
The alien looked from Evans to John. We never considered that.
Hi Shade Chronicle listeners, Matt Hampton here. I'm a writer from Brisbane, Australia. I'm working on a series of science fiction action novels, but I have a weak spot for horror, as I love using storytelling for helping people examine their fears, and for scaring my wife. The idea for this story came after my friend was in a minor car accident. They weren't injured, but I got thinking about if they'd had a warning not to drive that day, and began spinning up a tale of a successful man who has had vague warnings to help him avoid catastrophe his whole life. What if, one day, the warning told him nothing? Hope you enjoy.
Okay, so those were some good stories. And the first one, The Who You Die On, Matt did very good in the sense of this story pulls you in with the knowledge that Thomas has a superpower, in my opinion. And but I get that nagging feeling that at some point it will be his kryptonite.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, I get you.
Early on, I feel that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right when you get going. I mean, because to see a skeleton laying somewhere. I mean, well, first you got the white hawk, or no, excuse me, white crow, I guess. White crow, which is creepy in and of itself. But then to know that that's the harbinger of the skeleton that he's going to see, and that it's in this spot that he purposely bought and protected, so he can use it in his own crystal ball. I'm just like, this is a very unique perspective.
It's a
unique,
great thing. Unique.
Yeah. I hadn't come across a story. I mean, there are stories that are similar to this, but he really laid it out in a way that made sense. You know, if you were that person in that situation and you saw this warning from this thing, and it's, you know, obviously you can't explain it. It's just beyond explanation, and it's creepy and
you
weird.
feel you can't tell anybody.
Exactly, that too, because they'll think
you're
you're
alone.
crazy,
Yeah, exactly.
right? So what he does, the natural thing, he takes control of the area, he buys that, and then he uses it as his own little way to forecast what's happening in his life and his future, and finding ways to protect himself. I think, yeah, for sure. But there's, you know, because he's got supernatural insight and knowledge, there's always a price.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that as we go through it, we realize that it feels heart-wrenching, but it's a very great story about love.
Yeah.
In the sense of the ending part of it, just jumping ahead, he has to make a decision.
Yeah.
And he realizes that he knows what he has on the line.
Yeah.
And he still makes that decision to be, you know, what he has to do for the wedding.
Yeah.
And it's a very great, reveal at the end.
Yeah. And, you know, this story hits me at a time when, you know, when I was a younger man, all of our friends were getting married, so we'd go to all of their weddings and that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then everybody had kids, and then you're now raising families and you're doing life. And there weren't many weddings in this, you know, period of time, from the time that you got married to the time that your kids grew up, and then now you're an empty nester.
Right.
And now it seems in my time of life right now that all of those kids that left, now they're getting married, and now I'm getting invited to all these weddings.
Right.
And so I'm back in the wedding scene again.
Right.
Recently just attended a couple of them this year, as a matter of fact, and I got one more coming up next month. So, you know, that, and also the fact that my own father was not able to attend my wedding when I got married, even though he was alive, and physically probably could have done it, but he had some issues. He had some health issues that kept him from being able to attend. I could really relate to this concept. Yeah. And then, you know, in the story, the main character's own parents didn't attend his wedding because one was deceased and the other one had issues. it all spoke to me as a very relatable kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree. It spoke to me too, and I just want to say on a sidebar, the voice that read this, in the sense of what you chose, was great.
Oh yeah,
And this was really good.
We got good stuff to work with.
It was
for sure.
really very very good. I like how the main character Thomas was just always going through these different situations he had to go through, and he's realizing it and things like that, and then I feel he knew too that at some point he's going to have to make a decision that's going to be against what it is that he's experiencing, and that was just a great hook for me.
Well, and he's such a character that wants a very controlled and safe path for him to walk. He doesn't want adversity. He doesn't want danger. He wants to be safe, and he'll even go to the extreme in some cases, like we heard in the story, where the character won't go into the kitchen because there's a bunch of knives in there, and the skeleton had a knife stuck in its ribs.
Yeah,
and
he didn't want to go to that meeting, but he ended up going there
Right.
because he saw what he saw.
Right.
With the ring.
Yeah, so he's very much interested in a safe and controlled life for himself. And then finally being confronted with something that is beyond his control, he's going to have to step out of his comfort zone. He's going to have to go to his own daughter's wedding, even though there's a risk that something's going to happen to him because the skeleton is warning him, but he doesn't know what he's warning him from.
Right. And I think that he knew what it was gonna be, and he still put it on the line, and that's the amazing part of the story for me.
Right. He took the risk. He decided this was more important than anything that could come up that would potentially be a threat to him, so he's going to do it. And he's a courageous guy for that in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And then to have the bittersweet ending of he goes through all of this stuff, and mercifully he dies in his sleep.
That's
after
what I loved
having
about
the
that.
best night of his life.
Yeah, no pain.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
nothing, whatever, but he just passed away in the sweetness of his day, and that's what it was.
Yeah, for sure. So, in some ways he's to be applauded for his decision and recognized as being a hero in some sense. And yes, we can be sad about his passing, but at least he passed in an honorable, happy way.
Yeah, he did what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
And that's the best thing to do.
Yeah, for sure. So very, very interesting story. Not necessarily a horror story or a true sci-fi story, but certainly a mystical story that drew on the supernatural in a heavy way and had a pretty good payoff.
Yeah.
So
I love it.
Okay, well now we go into the next story. We've got Discovery by Jake Willis. And let's take a second to hear a little bit from the author himself about the story and his inspiration.
Hello, my name's Jake Willis. I'm 70 years old school biker, still riding. I first got into science fiction when I was 9 years old. I found a copy of Red Planet by Robert Heinlein in my school library. It was the only science fiction book there. I devoured this book in 2 days and it absolutely transformed my life. Science fiction became a very, very big part of it. Since then I've read just about everything I can lay my hands on, although I do prefer old school 40s, 50s, 60s, up to 70s stuff. Larry Niven, Asimov. One of my most favourite books is Footfall by Larry Niven, which I still think should be made into a film, and I hope it will be one day. The story you're about to hear is called Discovery. It came about 25 years ago after a discussion with a clergy friend of mine. I'm an atheist and he's he's clergy, so you can't understand that. And he mentioned something about where the idea of God originated from. And I said to him, probably aliens, as a joke. And he said, well, write it then. Go on, write something. So I said, okay, I will. And it's taken It took about 20 years before I got that idea fixed into my head that worked. I quite liked the idea, and it has been revised a couple of times. I'm not the best writer in the world, but I do come up, I think, with some really good ideas. I've written several First Contact stories, and I enjoy doing it. I've got lots of other stuff as well, but this discovery seemed to pique a lot of people's interests. I like it. I hope you will too. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jake. Appreciate the insight on what you're doing here and what the story was all about. So this one, I had a lot of things that reminded me about what is in this story. I'm thinking of stories like The Day the Earth Stood Still, where we encounter an alien race for the first time, and there's both echoes of this story from the original and also the remake with Keanu Reeves. I'm seeing a little bit of that. There's a couple of other stories that are out there. This is definitely a first contact kind of story, and I appreciate what Jake was doing in his character development of introducing us to the aliens and how they're guarded at first, and how the main character is trying to discover why they're here and what's going on. Yeah, for sure. So what were your thoughts on this story?
I love how, in that sense, what you were talking about, how Jake went to the next step, which was the next aliens that were not the one that he was wanting to get information from, and went there and found what he wanted to find.
Yeah.
And that was really great. And my biggest thing, and I get a lot of flack about this, about stories I like, Glengarry
Ross,
yeah. The one room stories.
Yeah. Everything happens in the one room.
I love those, and that's kind of like a play kind of thing.
Yeah.
And this played out to me to be a play, in the sense of that I like that it was just one area, one type of situation, and the whole story was told there, and that's what I really get into. Not because I want to be able to, branch off and go to other places or whatever like that, but if someone's going to bring me in this, just plop me down in this situation and put me in here, and then just tell me a story that is as good as Jake did, then I'm going to be there. And
there's tons of plays that are situated in that same scenario where it's in one scene or one location where everything unfolds, and it's still interesting. It's not boring that you're not going to different locales all over the place.
It's a weird thing. Maybe it's not the right word, but I honor that. In the sense of that it's just like, hey, just sit here and listen to this with us. You know what I'm saying? And it's a well-written dialogue discussion, and it actually speaks to current issues in a sense.
Somewhat,
in the sense of what it is, and it's very in depth. Sci-fi tale, and captures how humans are very different species than aliens. But then brings us together, and it was a really good adventure.
And I think, and maybe it's just me because what I'm bringing to the table here, I think there's a little bit of tongue-in-cheek kind of humor, that traditional British kind of take on things like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy,
Agreed.
kind of stuff, or even Doctor Who or that kind of stuff, where inadvertently the aliens, in their attempt to make contact with our race, our species, and eventually, when we're ready, establish a working relationship, accidentally cause our whole religious, environment or religious ideologies that span across all cultures, and they have diversity in terms of what they are and who they worship and that kind of stuff. They inadvertently cause all of that while attempting to get us to a point where they can start to work with us because they see all the resources we have.
Right, and they're just very shocked by how many gods or how many things we are believing, whatever like that. It's never happened before for 600 years.
Right.
For whatever they do, or 600, and
600 whatever.
And it's just like it's an amazing reveal at the end. That they did
and that we end on the fact that they had never considered the possibility
you won
that they would cause that. That's a nice little bit there that he put together. So it's very funny.
And I think it's very thought provoking, and honestly could be shrouded in truth. Maybe, I don't know.
Potentially, I mean, there's all kinds of theories about how we came to exist. You know, are we seeded from another alien civilization?
Right.
And that we were put here on this planet to do whatever, procreate and evolve to the point where when we've reached whatever milestone we need to reach, that alien race comes back for us and then starts to utilize us. There's been plenty of sci-fi stories that have kind of lived in that area or that idea, and Jake certainly has taken advantage of that idea and expanded on it in his own way.
And I love at the ending, like you said, or the ending where the alien is surprised that he brought that up, and it's very
Douglas
poignant.
Adams kind of thing.
Exactly.
It's very funny.
Agreed.
Well done, Jake. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now we're going to give you a sneak peek of the next episode. So just stay tuned, and we will see you next time.
Next time on The Shade Chronicles.
The night his mother died, Cyril Sharp heard a knock. Not a knock at the door upon the stroke of midnight. Nor did a phosphorescent phantom or frightful fit of laughter follow the sound. What Cyril heard at precisely 3:12 a.m., he noted the glowing digits of the alarm clock, was an abrupt rap on the top of the worn pinewood dresser beside his bed. Before the knock, he had lain awake, wondering how much longer his long-suffering mother would continue in the limbo of hospice where she withered silently in her morphine haze. The hospital records indicated Mrs. Agatha Sharp died at 3:10 a.m. After learning of the nearly simultaneous moment of death and mysterious knocking, Cyril wondered if his mother had reached out in a ghostly grasp across space and 2 minutes' time.
Behold and prepare thyself for a tale of swords, sorcery, and blood, long after the waters from the great flood of Enlil drained into the oceans and the hero King Gilgamesh was at last laid to rest in his tomb. A warrior did arise, sent by the gods to put fear back in the hearts of men and desire in the hearts of women. A battle-scarred helmet sat on his protruding brow and shaded the eyes that had seen countless men take their last breath on the end of his blade. Brilliant armor covered his chest that had tasted the blood of many warriors. Thick, corded arms hung from his sides, swollen from the work of war. Around his waist hung a sword like no other, some say forged by the fires of hell itself, and sharper than any dragon's bite. Verily, I say unto thee, this champion had no match in Mesopotamia, and few who would even dare challenge him, let alone stand in his path. Most men feared to speak his name, and looked away if they should have come upon him. Women let their gaze linger on his frame, long and dreamt of a chance to catch his eye. History knew him as Urma the Sumerian. The bard was interrupted by a loud belch coming from the figure slumped at the table, mostly drunk to the point of blacking out. The drunk was awakened by someone who had pulled his head up from where it rested on the plate by his hair. his thick beard still draped over the plate, and had now contained bits of the food he was dining on the night before. He could barely open his eyes, and his mouth fell agape. A soft moan escaped from somewhere deep inside him.
Is this the mighty warrior, then?
The person holding up his head said. He was dressed in fine robes, brightly colored and adorned with thick gold bracelets and chains. He wore a modest headdress, which was an indication to all who met him that he was an official in the local government, perhaps even royalty.
Very well.
The official released his hold on the drunk's head, and it fell back into the plate.
Bring him to the temple along with the bard. Bathe him, though, so he doesn't desecrate the sacred house of Nurgle.
He exited the hut and left the soldier to manage the drunk's removal. Another soldier entered after him with a large clay pot filled with water. He threw it on the drunk with little ceremony.
Thanks again for listening to the Shade Chronicles. For comments or inquiries, you can contact us at shadechron@gmail.com. That's SHADECHRON@gmail.com. Visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also get more information at theshadechronicles.com. The Shade Chronicles podcast is the creative property of Derek Leffridge and Lawrence Trokey. Any attempt to replay for broadcast or distribution portions of any episode of the Shade Chronicles without the prior written consent from the creators and/or significant compensation is strictly prohibited. Shame on you for even thinking about it in the first place. Thanks again for listening. Tune in next time for another episode of the Shade Chronicles.